Hi guys, my name is Matt, aka Ihrmes, and I want to talk to you about World of Warcraft Shadowlands. So it's Sunday today. There was two Blizzcon panels about World of Warcraft Shadowlands. One on Friday, which was the high-level overview with Ian, and then yesterday on Saturday there was a second session, which was a real deep dive into the expansion, where we got a lot of detail about a lot of the systems which had maybe been hinted at in the opening ceremony. So I sat down last night and watched both of them, and took a lot of notes on what I thought was interesting about the expansion and what I thought was going to be a big change. And I thought it was a good opportunity to really talk those through, because in the opening ceremony we got a lot of high level things. We saw brief things about the zones. We saw little bits about, we're going to have covenants, but we didn't really get any detail what any of those were or what they meant or how they were going to play out. So this time to actually go through and really get the detail was really interesting. I would say if you're going to watch one of the panels, if you don't have time to watch both, they're both, I think, about 45 minutes each. The high-level overview gives you pretty much probably the better content. I made a lot more notes out of that, and then there was kind of little extra bits I was picking up in the deep dive. But the high-level overview was kind of the one which I thought was best. So we go straight back to the beginning of what we've learned from those two panels. If we start with, we gained a lot about the plot of the expansion, and kind of an understanding of why we're going to Shadowlands and what that's about. So as a really brief overview, what they've been saying is that when you die in World of Warcraft, you are sent to what's called the Arbiter. Previously, he's then decided, based upon the sort of person you are, he would decide where you would go in the Shadowlands. So there's lots of different realms in the Shadowlands, and it makes a decision based upon what kind of person you are and what kind of personality you have, kind of where you were going to go. So there was four. There was Burston, I think it was pronounced. I may have got that, maybe pronouncing that wrong. I've just written it down, but so that was for people who really showed order and purposefulness. So that was kind of, we've already seen them in game, and we've seen them via the spirit healers and stuff like that. And those are people, I think the example they gave of somebody there was Uther the Lightbringer, who has a real purposefulness in his life. And that's reflected by him going on into the Shadowlands. There was Maldraxxus, which is apparently the source of the Scourge, and that is for people who are not necessarily evil but relentless. I think they said Thrall's mother went there. Then we saw Ardenweld, which is supposedly the opposite of the Emerald Dream. So the way they described that was the Emerald Dream is like spring and summer, while Ardenweld is like autumn and winter. And then the final place they went to deal with was Revendreth, which to me just really felt like vampire counts from sort of the Warhammer universe. But basically very vampire focused, and people like Kael'thas that were sent there. Now I think that was the universe for where if you were maybe you had flaws in it, but they could see you having redeemable features. So Kael'thas, they said, was sent there, who obviously had many setbacks, but deep down he's probably a good person. So he's sent there to atone and hopefully sort of make him into a better person. The final place they talked about, they said there's not a lot of detail on, is the place called the Maw, and the Maw is a prison. And what they were saying is that there's a rule with the Maw that you go in and you never come out. Now, so that's how historically it's always worked. That you would die, you'd go to the Arbiter, who would make a decision. You'd say, right, okay, you're going here, you're going here, you're going here. What they're saying at the moment is that for whatever reason, everyone is currently going straight to the Maw, straight into prison, and this is creating issues. I think they have a system called Anima, which they were saying Anima is how much power you're bringing to the Shadowlands, and if everyone's going to the Maw, everywhere else is deprived. So where the expansion seems to be setting up is Sylvanas, who at times seems to have been doing things to create maximum death. So, for example, like burning Teldrassil. That, in fact, what she's doing is sending spirits to the maw. And what it's becoming apparent is a lot of her power that she's seen, the power that she's able to use to defeat Bolvar, has come from her being in league with somebody. We don't know exactly who she's in league with, but they're referring it to as a character called the Jailer. And they're saying that the Jailer is a unique, unique. So it's not a character coming back that we've heard of. It's a new character, and she's in league with him. She's not a servant of him. She's actually in league with him, and therefore, he's giving her the power. And it seems that actually a lot of her actions over the past few months have been working towards that. So that is kind of our base plot. So we're now going to go in. We're going to go to the maw, where apparently we have the ability to leave, even though people usually can't. We can then go throughout the Shadowlands, and we can go pick and speak to the covenants and work with them. So we have a bit of a plot, and what that did was immediately answered some of the questions which I had from the trailer. So when I was talking about, well, why can Sylvanas suddenly defeat Bolvar, that was explained. They explained, so why she's so more powerful. Well, because she's in league with this Jailer character. I was kind of curious about, was there any risk that, if people feeling a bit of Sylvanas fatigue? Well, actually, maybe this is now trying to put in perspective that actually she's going through, a few things where a lot of what she's been doing has a reason. So that was interesting to see, and get a bit of history on that. Next thing they moved on to was to really talk about the Covenant and kind of give us a bit of understanding what that was, because in the opening ceremony they mentioned it and they talked about extra powers and stuff, but there was no great detail. So the Covenants are the ruling powers of the Shadowland. What they were saying is that you will level up through the Shadowlands and you'll be introduced to all of them. And you will temporarily be given powers from each of those covenants, and they talk through those powers, and they seem to be, some will be affecting combat directly, others will seem to be what they were calling to avoid combat, so things to reduce aggro radius. They were talking about, I think it was the Ardenweld one, you could turn into a fox, for example, and move a bit quicker, and you are ignored by NPCs. So there's some powers there, and they will impact upon gameplay. What they then said was at level 60, when you hit max level, you will pick a covenant, and this is kind of a you make that decision, and then you're kind of tied into that covenant. They did say there's ways to change it, but it's not going to be an instant process. So you will pick a covenant, you will get that power full time. And the way they described it was kind of similar to the war campaigns. So at the moment in Battle for Azeroth, there is a war campaign for the Alliance and a war campaign for the Horde. Well, actually, you will pick a covenant and then you get a war campaign, or the equivalent of a war campaign based upon that. And that will be full endgame content. So that sounds exciting. So then they've got, alongside that, what they call, was that endgame progression systems. Similar to kind of Hearts of Azeroth and things like that, and that came in the form of soul binding. Now, what soul binding was, or how they described it, was you will be able to bind your soul, as it would kind of suggest, to certain characters within that covenant, and that will give you just straight buffs. So the examples they showed was binding your soul to a certain character in, I think it was a Revendreth character. It looked very vampire-y, so I think it was that. But they were showing that, for example, one would give you a 5% crit, another one may give you a 6% parry, and you kind of get a little talent tree. You can pick who you want to bind your soul with, and they kind of suggested that was a on-the-fly decision. So similar to changing talents, you can change who you're bound with and the abilities that you're getting based upon that. So that was kind of an interesting system, and you'll be working to gain more sort of, I guess, kind of experience with those NPCs to unlock more abilities. What they did say was that there wasn't going to be a grinding system like there is with artifact power. So there seems to be a kind of a move away from, oh, if you're not working on this all the time, you'll be getting left behind. In terms of the rewards for doing this, they talked about cosmetic gear. So they talked about what they call backpack style cloaks. So instead of just a cloth cloak, you get things where they showed like wings and halos, and stuff like that. And it's just sort of really, flavor stuff. There is armor for each of those covenants, and the armor is obviously themed to the covenant. I think they showed the plate armor for that. There was mounts which they describe as upgradable, so I'm guessing you'll start with a mount which is ground only and then upgrades to flying or something like that, but they didn't go into a massive amount of detail. So we kind of got a good overview of covenants, and it sounded pretty interesting. And it sounded like what they're doing is they are addressing issues with the Heart of Azeroth where it makes trying to play alts very difficult. So what they were saying is that currently, if you level an alt, you get to level 120 as is now. You then have to repeat that Heart of Azeroth grind to get caught up. Or if you're trying to push endgame content and you're working on other characters, you're not pushing your main forward, and you can get left behind, or you can you can be letting your team down because you're not staying at the pinnacle of where you need to be. So what they've said is they've been addressing that. So they talked about with alts that you will actually start earning. What did they say actually? They said with an alt you would be able to actually pick your covenant straight away. So they accept that you've played through the campaign previously, so you can pick which covenant you want to be at level 50, and you can start earning your way through those rewards. So actually the leveling experience is still benefiting you. You're not rushing through it to get to endgame to then start playing the endgame content. And where I think this was the first thing that they talked about, which I thought was kind of a maybe where they've looked at the success that WoW Classic's currently getting and said, okay, one of the things people probably like is that in WoW Classic, the leveling experience is part of the game. So in retail, it feels like you power through the leveling experience to get to the end as quickly as possible to then start endgame. While in Classic, the leveling is a big part of the game, and you can, it takes so long to do that you can put a good amount of time into the game and be leveling, and that is part of the game. So this kind of felt like maybe a step back. What they're saying is, oh, well, actually, we'll make it so when you come to your alts, you can actually not worry about, oh, I need to rush through everything to get to the end. There's more to talk about alts, but I'll pick up that in a few minutes. So that was Covenants. It seems like an interesting system. I'd be excited to really see more of it come out as they release more information. They really they didn't go into too much detail on all of them, and we haven't seen all the armor and stuff like that. So that's to come, and that's something to look forward to. The next thing they spoke about was the main player hub. So I think it was called Ouroboros or something like that. I don't know how you pronounce it. I'm terrible at pronunciations. I watched this just before I went to bed last night, so I'm kind of a little bit hazy. I was sitting there scribbling notes down, but my notes don't tell me how to pronounce words, so never mind. So that's the main player hub for the expansion. They showed a map, and it's slap bang in the middle, and they didn't really go into a great amount of detail in it. But we're not going to be in Dalaran again. It's a whole new city. And there'll be more information to come on that one. They talked a bit about the pre-patch content, which sounded interesting. So one of my questions from the cinematic was, well, with the Helm of Dominion? I can't remember which one it is. I forgot this last time I did a video as well. I couldn't remember what the helm was called, and this time I've scrolled down. I've written Helm of Domination, but for some reason in my mind I'm thinking it's a Helm of Dominion, whatever it is. with that destroyed, in theory, the Scourge are going to run rampant because there's nobody holding them back. So what they've actually said is this time, without the Lich King in place, without Bolvar holding the undead back, we will have a pre-patch event of basically Scourge 2.0. They will be running rampant, trying to destroy the world, and we will have to fight them. They explained that Bolvar is going to have quite a big impact, and they also said, obviously the Death Knight, Bolvar and his Death Knights will have a big part to play in the game. And what they said was Bolvar's very well placed for this because he's seen both worlds. So what they're saying is when he got got killed at the Wrathgate, when he got hit by the blight in Wrathgate, and then he got burned by the Red Dragonflight's fire, he was infused with life. So he is over here with life, and then he's then got the Helm of Dominion, so he's been able to see through into the Shadowlands. So he's got both sides of it. So he's going to be a major character. The Death Knights are going to play a big part because a lot of their power seems to, as they kind of come from the Scourge, comes from the Shadowlands. And part of that, with the Death Knights playing a big part, is they've now made every class be able to be Death Knights, or every race, be Death Knights. So I think they were talking about Pandaren Death Knights. So that's a new feature. Then they moved on to content of the expansion. So we got a lot of stuff. So first, they've moved away from, in Legion and Battle for Azeroth, you could kind of come in, pick which zone you want to level as you wanted, and dot around the map, and then every story had a kind of a narrative to it, and then you'd move on, and you didn't need to do them any particular order because they're all unique, and the stories they were playing were kind of unique to that zone. What they've decided to do is move to a more of a narrative-driven story. So the first time you play through this, you will have to do it in a set order, and Blizzard will dictate where you go. And there will be a sort of start to finish story. So that is the level experience from level 50 to 60. At level 60, you then gain access again to the Maw, which is apparently a very difficult max level zone. And they said, for example, there is no Hearthstones. So you can't go in there and find an inn. Once you're in there, it's quite brutal. And one of the ways they talked about that was with a mechanic they've got, which is called Eye of the Maw. So what they were saying is you would go into the Maw, you may fight a mob, and you may die. What you'll then be told is that the jailer has noticed you. And what he will start doing is sending mobs at you. So he may, for example, as step 1, he may make mobs have a bigger aggro radius against you. So immediately it's stepped up in difficulty. If you keep killing, he will start sending specific mobs after you, and then start sending elites after you. So the way Blizzard want this to play out is you come into the Maw to do a specific thing. You'll go in, do it, and then you'll leave. Because if you stay there, and the longer you stay there, the more difficult and the more deadly the zone will become. In the middle of that zone, then they've got something called Torghast, which is the Tower of the Damned, which sounds like a really interesting bit of content. And the way they've described it is an endless dungeon, a lot like a sort of they described it as like a roguelike experience. So what they said was it changes every time. Every time you go in, it's unique. They will be changing it in terms of mobs. So they talked about events where they may flood it with a specific type of mob. But you every time you go in, it's about exploring, about getting as far as you can through it. It's not timed, so you're not going to go in and you've got 15 minutes to do as much as you can. It's you go in, you explore, you see how far you can get, and as you go on, it will get more and more difficult. They've said it's scalable, so the way they're saying is you can go in on your own. You can go in with a friend, or you can go in with a whole party of, I think they said 1 to 5 people. So, and that apparently the way it works, it does work. So you can go in with 2 tanks if you want to. If you can go with 5 DPS, and you should be able to progress. If you're doing it with 5 people, you don't need a tank, a healer, and 3 DPS, which is nice. You can do it with the people that you have available. They've said that there's going to be upgrades available, and they showed a couple of examples of that. So they were talking about, you may get so far, and you will be able to choose whether you want some more health or some more damage. And then they talked about some more of the exciting upgrades you can get. So they had one where you may do shadow damage on hit. And when you're doing shadow damage, it will stack. And then you may get a second ability which says when you do shadow damage, have a chance to cause an explosion or something like that. And these sort of abilities will stack. And these are unique to every time you go in. So that sounds like it's going to be repeatable content. The way they described it is end game content without the needs for a raid. So you want to do end game content and be getting rewards and such. You can do that on your own. And it sounds like it's going to be very repeatable and sounds pretty exciting. Then talked about the more regular stuff that we get. So they've talked about on launch there's going to be 8 dungeons. So there's going to be 4 leveling dungeons, 1 for each zone, and then there's going to be 4 more max level dungeons. So when you hit level 60, 4 more become available. There's also going to be a raid available on release of the expansion called Castle Nathria. I think it was. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'll just put the text up and let you decide how it's pronounced. And the way they describe that is basically like Dracula's castle. And they showed a couple of screenshots of that. It looked pretty exciting. I haven't done much raiding at all for years now. My raiding experience kind of dies in, I want to say, Mists of Pandaria. But, the stuff they were showing looked very, very exciting. So that's good. They then moved on to have a bit of a talk about alts. And just alts in relation to the Shadowlands. And I think I've already covered some of this, but they described alts as kind of a new game plus experience. So instead of having to play through the content just as you have in your main character, what you can do instead is pick a covenant straight away, unlock all those powers, start upgrading your way through that covenant straight away. You can also you can level in different ways, so you don't have to follow the narrative story. You can go do this zone and do this. They said you can level up with world quests if you want. So world quest, I'm guessing once available on your main account main character will be available on all other characters. And the idea is that you can really start working through end game progression while leveling up. So you're not having to rush to that final step. And that's kind of what they said about alts for Shadowlands. They then started moving to talk about systems. So where the way they described this was player agency, they called it. And what they said was giving you control over your destiny. Now, the first thing that they talked about was professions. And there was very brief. It was like one slide. And they gave the example that at the moment, if you're a blacksmith or a leatherworker or a tailor or whatever, you may be trying to craft some pants, and you may have to craft 100 of them to get the exact stats you want. So you may want, I don't know, if it's, your blacksmith, you may want stamina, strength, crit and mastery or something like that. And you may have to craft a load of different copies of those pants to get the ones you want, because every time you do it, it's randomized. So what they said was, how about instead you go have the base pattern of those pants, and then you can drop some extra materials, probably in the form of gems, into that, and actually get guaranteed what you wanted. And this is when they start to talk about RNG for RNG's sake. What they want to be able to do is, yes, there will be RNG in the game, but you shouldn't have to rely upon it. So, get rid of it when it's not needed. For example, crafting, allow you to actually pick what you want. They talked about in relation to the weekly mythic caches or chests or whatever they may be called, where they were saying, at the moment, outside of the first couple of weeks, you're probably going to get something which you're not fussed about because there's such a big loot table. They could do things where they give you an option of 6 things and you get to pick. And even if there's none of the gear you want, you can then go and pick a 7th reward, which is just maybe, I don't know, gold or something, something stupid like that, where you can still feel like you've achieved something at the end of the week. So the idea there is really to try and pull back randomness and make sure that when you're spending time on stuff, you are getting the rewards you want. They talked about legendaries, so legendaries are coming back, and what they said was they've learned from Legion, where you could. It was difficult to get. Well, it wasn't difficult to get legendaries in Legion, but it was difficult to get the legendaries that you specifically wanted. You would have to work through so much, and therefore then you get rewarded with it. Well, you may get rewarded with the legendary you don't want. So instead, what they're going to let you do is they're going to have a range of legendaries and say, right, you pick the one that you want, and you can work towards that. When you've got it, then you can pick the next one you want and start working towards it. So giving sort of the control back to you to pick the rewards you want and spend your time working towards it, and it not be, you're not getting screwed because you work through. I mean, Legion was it bad luck protection? You'd work through all of that. Oh, I've done all the stuff I need to do now. Get basically guaranteed legendary. I get it. Oh, it's not a legendary I wanted. It's not useful for my spec or whatever. So that's going in the bank. Instead, you can pick. I want this one because it's my best in slot or whatever it is. I'm going to work towards that. The next thing they talked about, and this was one of the areas which I was really quite excited and really in favor of what they're doing, is they started talking about class identity. And what they were saying there is that when you play Battle for Azeroth and you start leveling, you almost don't pick a class, you pick a spec. So the example they gave was Priest. You start and you basically start as a discipline priest. You're getting the abilities of discipline. You get to level 10, you then pick your spec. So you pick Shadow, and then half your abilities disappear and they're replaced with a whole new set of abilities. And what they want to do is move back to, you want to be a paladin, you want to be a priest, and you have a range of abilities. Yes, you still have specs, and specs have specialisms, but what they said is, the way they described it was that you should be, if you're a paladin, you can heal, you can tank, you can DPS, and by speccing into one of them, you become more efficient or better at doing that job, instead of it being, I'm a paladin, if I'm a holy paladin I can heal, I'm a protection paladin, I can only really tank. And they talked about that in relation to WoW Classic. In WoW Classic, you kind of worked through your talent points and you improved protection, but you had access to kind of all those abilities, but you would get better at tanking, for example. No, tanking is a terrible example for paladins in Classic because they can't do it. It doesn't work. I tried it, don't like it. If you want to be healing though, you can you have those abilities and you can improve them and improve them. Yes, you get some talents through which give you new abilities, but the base abilities are there. And there was a real discussion there around the difference between class identity and spec identity, and that moving away from having those as two separate things to you pick being a paladin. They talked about how one of the biggest bit of feedback they get is that people just want that fixed, and what they were saying is that if somebody's saying just fix it, it means that there is really a problem. So they kind of knew that they needed to look at it, and so the first thing they're doing to sort of combat that is bringing back class defining abilities. So where they talked about an example was paladins and shamans and rogues. So what they were saying is, paladins would get auras back because from Classic, you were in a group, you would see the devotion aura in your buffs. You knew there was a paladin about. If you were running around and you see totems on the ground, you knew there was a shaman. Those were sort of they were kind of iconic to those classes. So they're bringing those back to kind of to be available. It'll be interesting to see how much stuff is going to come back. So they talked about paladins are going to get auras back, shamans are going to get totems, rogues, everyone's going to be able to use poisons instead of, I think assassination at the moment is the only class with poisons in. And then what they said is that they didn't give any more examples, so I wonder whether our warriors going to get stances back or something like that. So that'll be interesting to see. And in fairness, one thing they did talk about was why these steps had been taken in the first place, and one of the reasons they said was, with Legion and this, they were giving everyone an artifact. What they want to do is have every class have its own identity, and so they said rogues, combat rogues, became basically the pirate spec. So therefore, everything moved off, and assassination became the poison spec because they wanted that to to tie into the artifacts. So it's understandable why this had happened, but I think it's good that actually they're looking at it and they're thinking, right, okay, we need to roll back on this and we need to adjust it and we need to bring some of it back. They talked about weapons. So they talked about the beginning of leveling, and they talked about shamans. They said, if you play a shaman, you play elemental, you will have a hammer and a shield, and you will never use them because you'll be doing lightning bolt and stuff like that. So they said instead of the first few levels, they would give you some abilities, so you get to use those, and you get to get the feel for other specs, so you can make a bit more of a decision on what I want to do when I hit the point that I get to pick my specs. They talked about bringing back iconic spells throughout the specs. So one of the examples was Consecrate. They said Consecrate would be available to all paladins instead of it being tied to Holy and Protection at the moment. Retribution would also get it because it is something which people remember paladins for. They were talking about warlocks and their curses, so those abilities which have been pruned many patches ago. I think maybe in Mists of, I'm not sure if Mists of Pandaria or Warlords of Draenor, a lot of these abilities went. You talk about hunters and things like Eyes of the Beast. So that isn't even an ability which necessarily affects combat, but it's an ability which is kind of iconic to hunters, and something which people want back because it's part of their character. So that was kind of what they started to talk about with class identity. I thought there was a lot of good stuff there, and I'd be really interested to see when we start to see what the classes look like in Shadowlands, how much stuff's been restored. For me, as somebody who's played a lot of Paladin, I'd like to see auras back, and I'd also like to see blessings back. No, I doubt we'll get both, but I'd be interested to see how much stuff is coming back, or if Paladins are getting auras and that's all they're getting. But yeah, we'll learn about that more, I'm sure, soon. The next thing they talked about was the whole leveling experience, and I think this is something they were right to address because at the moment it's a bit of a mess. You come into WoW and you go through the Cataclysm zones, and then you jump back to either Burning Crusade or Wrath of the Lich King, which is before the Cataclysm. So the story's mixed up. You then go through Pandaria, and they gave a stat with Pandaria. So you go through Cataclysm. The Cataclysm or Pandaria you can go through. But what they gave with the stat with the Pandaria zones is the people who choose to level that way basically only ever do Jade Forest and half of the zone. So you never see entire stories. What they talked about there was trying to fix that. So if you're a new player, and we'll start with, there's two paths here. So we'll start as a new player. If you're a new player, you start in a new zone. Did I scroll down what the new zone was called? Yes, Exile's Reach. So I've never played WoW before. I'm going to log in for the first time. I get sent to an area called Exile's Reach, which I have to go through, and it's level 1 to 10. It's designed for new players, so you get a lot of experience to classic WoW mobs. So you see Murlocs, you see ogres, all that good sort of stuff. You get a real flavor of it. So they spoke a bit about how the design of it is like kind of the best of WoW, and it's really there to try and bring in new players and kind of get them excited. It ends in a little instance, so it's a 2-boss instance. They said you're not locked into that, so you don't have to queue for it. You can do it solo if you want. You can do it with whatever people you have. But again, it's just to give you a bit of a flavor. You do that. You then are sent back to your capital city. You then are sent to go play through the Legion gameplay. Was it Legion? Sorry, no, you get sent through the Battle for Azeroth, because it's the previous expansion. So you get sent through the Battle for Azeroth content. So you see all that story, and then you are sent into the Shadowlands. So you will do 1 to 10 in Exile's Reach. You do 10 to 50 in Battle for Azeroth, and you'll do 50 to 60 in Shadowlands. So you will never see a lot of that content. You'll never see, Cataclysm starting zones. You'll never see Burning Crusade, Wrath of Lich King, Mr. Pandaria, Warlords of Draenor, or Legion. You can obviously go back later and play them, but that's how you have to play it. They then talked about alts. They get a choice. So you can go through and start a new character and go through Exile's Reach and play through that content, which I'm imagining anyone who's starting an alt after Shadowlands comes out will probably do, because it's new content, they'll want to see it. You then finish that, you get sent to Stormwind in the same way that you do if you're a new player, and you are met by Chromie, who basically says, you've been through all this before, pick what you want to do. So, do you want to go do Wrath of the Lich King? Okay, I'll send you there. And she sends you to do the Wrath of the Lich King content, and you can do that level 10 to 50. And that's interesting because what it allows them to do is you to get to play through an entire expansion's narrative story. And you don't have to worry about out-leveling something. You'll just get to do it. And they said if you want to go through and do a bit here, a bit there, you can. But you do get the ability now to actually play through an entire narrative. They talked about the pacing of that leveling experience, and they said depending on your play style, it's going to be 60 to 70% faster. But even though it's 60 to 70% faster, because we've got reduced levels, so we're no longer going from 1 to 120, we're going 1 to 60, what it means is that you're not leveling up every 10, 15 minutes. And that means that you can, you level up slightly slower, you've got less to go, but everything feels a bit more meaningful. And that moves them to a position which they call every level matters. So at the moment, and I started a level a warrior in retail recently, and I did like 1 to 30 in, I don't know, a couple of hours. It wasn't many hours at all. But levels didn't really matter. You kind of, you were getting one every like 5-10 minutes, and it was kind of, you're just burning through them, and it it didn't matter. You kind of, I'm level 27 now, right? Okay, it doesn't matter. I didn't get anything from it. So instead, what they want is that every level you get something, whether it be access to a dungeon, whether it be an ability, whether it be a talent point or something like that. By squishing that down to 1 to 60. They're able to deliver that. Every level you are gaining something. So you start to feel like you are progressing. And they talked about that being a core part of an RPG. So by doing that, they think they're going to fix the leveling experience. And that was kind of the end of the presentation. There was quite a lot covered there across those two panels. And like I said, the overview with Ian Hassikosis kind of covers a lot of this. You don't get all the detail of the the spec stuff, but you get the high level. We're going to do something about it, and until we start to see alphas and betas come out, it's going to be difficult to know the full scale of the changes and fully know where we stand. But we've got a good overview here of what's coming. For me, the most exciting things for me, I think, are probably the Tower of the Dams, because that sounds like content which I will really be able to jump into. I jump on a WoW and play WoW for like an hour or so here or there. What I don't do is really spend a lot of time raiding, or I don't spend much time doing dungeons. I don't think I've even done all the dungeons in Battle for Azeroth yet. I've gone from being quite hardcore to like I said, Mr. Pandaria. I did pretty much every raid and I got most of the heroic bosses and all that sort of stuff, to now where I don't have time to do that, and I don't have the group of friends that I used to have playing the game and all that sort of stuff. So something like that where actually I can do it with 1 or 2 people, or I can do it on my own, and I can feel like I'm getting difficult content in the same way they did with Legion and the Mage Tower, where it was actually a really difficult bit of solo content which I don't need to rely upon anyone else. I just have to do well in myself. I think is very exciting. The other thing I'm excited for is that the whole class changes. I spoke about it quite a bit 2 minutes ago, so you can probably tell I'm excited, but that ability to move back to a bit more of those iconic things. And like I said, with Paladins, I'm very excited to have auras back, just because it's something which I was excited about. It's something about when I started to play Classic WoW, you started gaining those abilities, and you were like, oh, I remember that, and you were excited to get it, and it was, it felt like you were a Paladin because you had auras. So that's everything they've covered. Again, we've done this pretty whistle stop. I don't know how long we've been recording. 40 minutes. So we've done about one of those panels length of time talking about all this stuff. I'd highly recommend watching the panels if you have access to them. I don't know if they're going to be available later on. I know they're behind the virtual ticket at the moment. So if you have access to them, I'd definitely watch them. If you don't, I'm sure they'll appear somewhere suspicious at a later date. I'm very excited to see when the alpha and beta comes out of WoW. Fingers crossed, I should hopefully get access to those, because I usually get fairly early-ish access to betas and stuff. I suspect it's because I've been paying for WoW for so many years now. They just know I'm going to keep throwing them money, so they say, here you go, here's your little reward. I don't tend to actually jump into them, but maybe this time I will, because a lot of the stuff I'm seeing is very exciting. So yeah, that's what I'm excited for. That's what my views, thoughts, and opinions on it. If you have anything that you're super excited for, please let me know in the comments. It'd be really good to see what you think is the most exciting part of the expansion, what you're looking forward to. If you have already made a decision about which covenant you want to join, I still want more information, but my gut would be go for the one which is more tailored around order. I can't remember who that was now, but yeah, order and purposefulness. That just sounded very paladin to me. And in fact, actually, we're getting a little bit sidetracked, but the artwork they showed of that really reminded me of Diablo, and the high heaven and stuff like that, and it just kind of felt like that. So I don't know whether they've maybe drawn a little bit of inspiration from that, but that is, that would be my gut reaction. But we'll wait and see. We'll see how it plays out, and maybe I'll make a different choice. I feel like that's something I'm gonna kind of dwell over. I'll be like, oh, I make the wrong decision. Well, actually, I know you can change, but it's gonna be a pain and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that's my thoughts, my views. I've been Matt, aka Amy. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Please give it a subscribe. I'm going to do some more content in the next coming days. So I'm going to sit down and watch the panels for Diablo. I'm going to sit down and watch the panels for Overwatch and make some videos on those in a similar vein of this, talk about what they talked about, my kind of view on it. So please give me a subscribe if you've enjoyed that. I will be streaming again soon on twitch.tv/Ihrmes. So if you want to see more content from me, you can view it there. And thank you for your views today. Take it easy.